Welcome, everyone, to the new episode of Tomorrow Never Knows. Sir Warren of the Beatles Kingdom and me, Bob Wilson, welcome our wonderful guest, Anna Frawley. The Fab Fraud talks Beatles and so much more. Hey, everyone, how are you doing today?
Hello, Bob. Nice to be on your show. Hello, Warren.
Hi.
Hello, Anna. How you doing, my dear?
I'm very well, thank you very much.
So, Anna, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yes, well, I was born in Poland, and when I finished my high school, graduated and went to London because of the Beatles. We here talking about Beatles, so this is connection. The reason is I was always very much into French culture and French language. I was very good, the best in school in French, but never had English. But I changed the schools to learn English because I've discovered Beatles, and London was an obvious place because maybe I should have thought Liverpool, but never occurred to me to go to Liverpool. The capital city seemed like perfect, and I'm glad I did go. I went to study drama. I studied in a Central Academy of Film Art and Drama in London. I studied drama, which is acting and history of film, some film editing, and that was it. That's how I moved to England. I wasn't going to stay there, but I met my husband in the meantime, and we're still together. He's English, by the way.
So, you went to England and you found a husband and you also investigated the Fab Four. That's really cool. How,
Yes.
how did you first come to learn of the Beatles? Do you remember the first time you saw them or you learned about them?
I very much, yes, I remember my mother's brother, who is only 12 years older than me, came one day from another city in Poland, especially to introduce me and my mother to the Beatles. He discovered them and he was totally overwhelmed. He was a musician, he was a drummer in a jazz band, but that was just a sidekick really for him because he had ordinary job as well. And my mother, the whole family was very musical. My mother loved all kinds of music from opera, Beethoven, Bach, whatever, to popular music, Sinatra, and all that. And we listened to the first song. The only song he brought with him was I Saw Her Standing There. And I remember that very well. When we listened, my mother liked it, and I liked it too. I was only, well, 9 or something like that. So, but yes, it was a great introduction. It was probably way past the time other people got to know them, but I was still young, so it was that kind of thing.
When you were in Poland and you came to see the Beatles, like in America, they showed them on the Ed Sullivan Show. So I'm
Yeah,
sure you. When was the first time you became aware of that show? Did you see it in Poland
I
on the
didn't
news?
show it all until, well, internet, I suppose. Also, sometimes, I suppose, in the Beatle films, the black and white films, there were snips and snaps, documentaries and things from that show, shown on BBC and that kind of thing. But the whole show only saw a few years ago on YouTube, I suppose. Now I've got it on my own CD, the DVD, sorry, the whole show. But before it was only that. But my first glimpse of the Beatles was from a Hard Day's Night film, which I loved totally. All my friends did, and that was the first introduction to how they were because it was kind of character based as well.
So you went to see A Hard Day's Night in the movie theater in
Yes,
Poland?
yes, yes.
Was
No,
that a big deal? Was everybody excited? Was it very crowded?
so yes, and it was played for many months in so many cinemas, and my friends and I used to go to very small cinemas eventually when they stopped playing in big ones, out of town, just to go. So I think I must have seen in the first year about 24 times this film.
24 times. So you went to the movies 24 separate times to see the Beatles? That's amazing.
Yes, well, we loved it. people especially dressed up for that, and was, it was the kind of really big event for the young. But I took all my family members also to see it, and my grandfather who actually fell asleep.
So he
Unfortunately,
fell asleep. What
yeah.
about when Help came out? Did you obviously would have gone and seen that too? Do you remember when you went to
Yes, I
see
went
Help?
to see Help, and I liked that as well. But A Hard Day's Night was it's still my favorite. But yes, Help was fine. Of course, was in color, and the music obviously was the main thing, which one wanted to see.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
So the Beatles really never came over to tour there. What were the record releases like? Were they similar to the record releases
No,
that?
there were no record releases. That was a time where there was nothing like that. We got records because it was all black market, and people were putting them on various, like postcards and things like that. You could actually get great sound on some of this. It was unbelievable what people can do when they've got no, official releases. But we always got it, and of course people got it from their relatives from abroad, so that was one way to get it. And radio stations played it regularly all the time, really. TV also, so that was okay. We were unique in that way to other so-called communist bloc, as it was allowed, the music was allowed from the Western countries.
That's very interesting. How long did it take until the records were officially released in Poland?
I think it's probably by now. By then, I lived in England, so but it must have taken till 1989, where Poland became basically a free country.
That's amazing. So Beatle records weren't really available, in stores until
No,
1989.
no, they were in a sort of unofficial, way always. If you want to get it, you get it, but not in a normal kind of shops or anything like that. No.
Okay, so and then you went over to London, and how did your wonderful tell us about your radio show and where people can listen to it and stuff? And how did the show come about?
Well, I live now in Warsaw. I'm back in Warsaw, and the radio station. I lived in London for over 35 years, and moved
Okay.
back here. My husband wanted to live in Poland, although he's English, and we're very happy here. Although our children, two daughters, stayed back in London, but the show was started by a well-known Polish journalist, not the show, the radio station. He started the radio station 10 years ago, and he loves the Beatles, obviously. And he had the symbol of our station is a yellow submarine. It's a different,
Oh, that's
slight,
nice.
yes. And he, when my friend who is the owners and very well-known journalist here, who started the station, when my friend visited him at the station, he said, I know someone who could have a great show for you because she knows so much about the Beatles. And because he's a Beatlemaniac himself, the owner of the station, he even to this day has fantastic hairstyle, the sort of Beatles 1965. And
Oh
he
wow.
looks great with that because his hair is thick. Although he's, about 50 now, so still keeps okay. And he agreed, and he pursued me for over a year to start this show. I wasn't really keen because I studied drama. I was always an actress. I did work for theatre, for radio occasionally, but only, in the plays, radio plays, things like that. I read some novels on the radio in fragments, poetry, or commercials, but well, never had my own show, and I was really scared I would have to do everything myself, all the engineering job and thing. And that was naive of me. And that's what put me off to do it. But he pursued me, kept calling me and calling. Eventually we met in a restaurant and we got to agree. And he said, I'm going to have people to do the show for me, technical stuff. So just come over. And my first shows I started with a friend who is a radio journalist, and it was in Polish for several weeks. And then my engineer suggested to the boss that it should be in English because I had so many English listeners already, or English speaking listeners, despite the fact show was in Polish. And he agreed. So now I've got international audience, which covers absolutely every continent. I'm very, very happy with that.
And tell us the name of the show and where people can listen to it.
Yes, it's the radio station is called Radio Wnet, or in Polish Radio Wnet, which is in English would be WNT. Sorry, the WNT. Yes, WNET. That's in English. Wnet means now, kind of in Polish, but it's a play on word. And for English speaking listener, that's the WNET. And it's on FM. I'm not sure now. I haven't got with me what is the, but I will check it out. And it's always on internet and on my Facebook page, which is my personal Facebook page, profile page, timeline. I always advertise. I also have radio page, which is Anna Frawley's Beatles show on Radio Net. That's on Facebook. That's the page dedicated to the show and the Beatles. And I advertise in all the Beatle groups. And my listeners are from South America, Japan, Australia, Central America, Brazil, and also all of Europe, and an enormous amount from United States.
And in what year did you start doing the show?
Over 8 years ago.
Very good.
Yeah.
So the fans can go to your Facebook page, Anna Frawley, and they can find the different installments that they can listen to archived, right?
Yes, it's Friday night, 6 p.m. Here, 5 p.m. British time. European time is mainly 6 p.m. And US East would be 12 p.m. 12 p.m. noon, that is, except for this week, which was time change we had earlier. But from next week, it's 12 p.m. US East.
And they can listen to the archive. They don't have to listen
Oh,
live,
yes.
right?
On Mixcloud, you've got all the podcasts there. Yes.
Well, that's great. And we all love all four Beatles, but if you had to pick a favorite Beatle, and I think I know who your favorite is, which one do you pick and why are they your favorite?
Well, my favorite is always has been from the moment I set my eyes on him in A Hard Day's Night was John Lennon.
All
So
right. So
I never changed, but I like them all, of course, but he was always numero uno for me. Yeah.
Well, you know Warren Brown, so he has some questions for you too. So Warren's gonna ask you some questions now
Sure.
and follow up from me.
Hi,
Welcome,
Warren.
I just want to reiterate how nice it is to speak to you, Anna. As you know, I'm a graphic artist. I do a lot of artwork, and I believe I have made something for one of your shows. I don't know if you used it or not, but I made it. Most of my questions are going to be art related, and but I want to first start off by asking you about your program. You have many wonderful guests on your show. Which three guests would be your favorite?
Yes, my very, very favorite of all would be Julia Bird. That's John Lennon's sister, half sister,
Wow.
if you like. And she was the first one I interviewed, and she is such a lovely lady. We became close friends, and we correspond and all that. Julia is the warmest, the nicest, the wonderful, very intelligent, sharp, just like her brother. Brilliant, brilliant girl, woman. And yes, Julia was the first and number one for me. And also Bill Harry, who was close friend with John at the art school when they were together. Bill Harris,
Wow.
an artist himself, and also we are friends now and correspond regularly and so on. And Bill, and then perhaps Tony Bramwell, who was also a Beatle friend, and he worked very hard until the end of Apple practically, first starting with Brian Epstein and then went on with all that. So these two people, because they were close friends, three
Right.
people, yes. But I had many other great people I interviewed, of
Uh,
course.
Right. You've had some really nice guests on your show, and they've been awesome to listen to for all the listeners out there. Please take a peek at her archives. They are really, really, really good with some interesting people on them.
Thank you, Warren. Thank you very
And and thank you. Do you have a favorite artist or photographer who has covered the Beatles? Myself, I like Klaus Vorman. Um, I,
much. Klaus Berman is fantastic and a lovely guy too. And yes, my favorite cover definitely of the Beatles album is The Revolver. He's done great job with that. And I love all the drawings he did in Hamburg of the Beatles.
yeah, on our last show, we were talking anthology, and the artwork for anthology is just amazing.
Yes,
Um, my favorite of Klaus's is, of course, Revolver, which is my favorite Beatles album.
yes.
Do you have a favorite Beatles album?
No, it varies, it very much varies from the mood I am in. I love them all probably.
Right,
We have different albums because I'm only familiar really with the British editions, and Americans had much more albums released, and so I'm not really familiar with all that. But from the British album releases, I like them all completely, even the Please, starting from Please Please Me, and of course ending on Abbey Road or Let It Be if you like. Yeah.
yes, I like all of them myself, so it's kind of hard to pick, but I do like the Revolver album very much more than I do any other one myself.
Mhm.
Um, if you could ask any Beatle a question, which questions come to your mind?
Well, that's a difficult one because they've been asked so many questions already. Practically any question you could ask a Beatle, it was already asked. But in case of John, I suppose I would ask him about the going to Britain. Did he actually regret not going back to Britain and staying so long in America? Because he wasn't really happy in this last years, I don't think. He claimed he was happy in New York, but he
Mhm.
didn't seem to be, I don't think. And I wonder because towards the end, he planned to go back to Britain, and he started connecting much more with his family there. Uh,
Right.
and that was kind of pushed away by his wife, I suppose, for a long time. So, yes, that would be the question. Did he regret not going back and hanging on for so long?
Well, that was a very awesome question, and now that you mentioned it, would be one of my first questions to John too.
Yes.
That's very good. Um, as I mentioned already earlier, I done a piece of artwork for you. You seem to like it.
Warren,
Um,
did I
you're welcome. And I'll be doing some more artwork to advertise your show that we are doing right now. What might you like for me to make for you?
Warren, I leave it up to you. I love your artwork. I'm struck always how wonderful and imaginative it is. And I love the colors you use and also precisely that, the imagination you've got and the connections you make. I love it. So
Uh,
I really leave to the artist. I'm not gonna tell you what to do now. I
right.
trust in you.
Well, I thank you very much for that answer. That was very kind of you. And right now, I'm going to hand it off to the bulldog.
Yeah,
Um, I'll let him carry on with this awesome conversation.
sure.
Hey, Anna, it's funny to think the Beatles, stopped releasing records basically in 1970, except for the ones on anthology. And they've
Yes,
made so many solo albums, and that's gone from like 1970 to, today in 2019. So
yeah.
there's so many solo albums. I was wondering which ones are your favorite solo albums. Do you have a particular one that you really, really like, or a few? What are your favorite ones?
Well, I must admit that I was very choosy. I didn't buy any albums by Paul, well, maybe first one, or George or Ringo at all for many, many years. I was just completely concentrating on John Lennon's further, Paul's Beatles thing. And I occasionally, of course, heard uh, Paul's things, songs and music. But eventually, doing this show, I have discovered how amazing music he made over the years. And so did George, of course. And I do like a lot of those. But to be fair, the favorite really, which I never thought it would be because I never used to be into rock and roll, probably too young for that or something. But uh, through the Beatles, I kind of discovered rock and roll, like they discovered before in Black Artists of America and things. And I love John Lennon's rock and roll album, despite the hiccups he went through. That I love Paul McCartney's rock and roll versions, and one of my very favorite Paul McCartney album is the live in at the Cavern with Dave Gilmour and many other great musicians there when they were doing all this old rock and roll stuff. I really love those things a lot. Also, Walls and Bridges, of course, great album and all that. But I'm really pleased that Beatles turned me on into old rock and roll.
So you like the old rock and roll. My favorite Lennon cover is "Stand by Me." I like that one a lot, and I
Yes,
like Paul when he does "No Other Baby," and I like "That's All Right, Mama."
absolutely. And that was on this Paul and Dave Gilmour did together. I had pleasure to know Dave Gilmour personally in my social life. And unfortunately, and in those days when because it was during his first marriage, now he's in a second marriage, so because I knew him through the first wife, we don't connect anymore. But when he was still with Ginger, who was very talented artist, American woman, and we didn't discuss, unfortunately, his friendship with Paul, which he's great friends. I wish I did, but in those days I didn't think of it. I wish I did. But yes, they recorded this great album together, and they still record every now and again and play together.
Did you ever get a chance to see? I was going to ask about the Beatles, but I'm interested in Dave Gilmour too. Did you ever get to see any of his performances or shows?
Yes, I've seen Dave in not with Pink Floyd, but with his sort of makeup band in LA and in San Francisco. He had a studio in LA at the time. That was late 1980s, and yes, I've seen a few of this. And in London, in his studio, he used to produce a lot of records at the time. So, but he also liked always playing, and he's one of the greatest guitar players ever, I think.
Well, that must be something. That's incredible.
Yeah.
And have you seen any of the Beatles ever live in concert?
Well, yes, I've seen Paul McCartney here in Warsaw. He was fabulous. The best concert I've ever been. That was 4 years ago or five, something like that. And I've seen Ringo. Yes, Ringo is fine, of course, great show, but Paul is just fabulous. His concerts are amazing.
Paul is amazing, and Ringo too. Where did you see Ringo? Did you see him in America or in Europe?
No, in Warsaw here. Yeah.
So he came over with the All Star Band. Was
Yeah.
it? Is it because they've come not that many times? Was
He
it
doesn't
extremely
come to Europe
romantic?
very often now because He's been booed by people in England quite a bit, and especially in his hometown. But yes, he did come at the time, uh, so I managed to see him, and it was entertaining. But he's very restricted. He just does his stuff, and that's it. And with Paul is very different. He goes on for 3 to 4 hours, non-stop. It's amazing, just amazing.
Well, Paul has really kept it alive. I think it's something that he is singing many songs live that the
Yeah,
Beatles only did in the studio, and now with the technology, they sound very good on stage.
indeed. Yes.
So I think that's amazing. Do you remember any of the songs from that show putting you on the spot that you liked live that maybe
I
stood
liked
out to you?
all of it. We stood. I had very good seats, very close to the stage, but nobody was sitting, of course. And we were singing non-stop with Paul, starting from 8 days a week, I believe, or something like that. It was absolutely fantastic. Everything. Everything was beautiful, and of course, something with the ukulele and tribute to George and all that. The beautiful show.
Did George, to your knowledge, ever come over and play in any of the countries that had been behind the Iron Curtain, or he never got? I don't think he ever got over there.
No, I don't think. No, not to my knowledge. I don't think so. No.
But I guess now they have the records, the live albums, and they also would have some DVDs of George.
Yes, of course. No, they have a lot of fans. Both, I mean, all of the Beatles have enormous amount of fans on what used to be the site of the Iron Curtain. Yeah.
Because they had never been there before, and I know it's the Beatles, so they probably sell out in like 2 minutes anyway. So it might be a silly question, but what was the demand like for tickets when Paul and Ringo came and played there? It must have been. It's a silly question because I guess it's obvious, but what was the
It's
demand?
the same as everywhere else. You had to be quick to get them. But yes, and they're not cheap, especially Poles. But people make, and Pole's been back again here, just in different town. He wanted to see Krakow, and he went there. And he's very interesting because he actually goes about. He, takes photographs himself and things. He always had this attitude. In London, he used to go on a tube. I mean, that's underground train and all that. Like anybody. And even now, he goes on a train back to his English country house in East Sussex from London there on a train with everybody else. I like this about him a lot.
When you were in London, did you ever get a chance to see him, or did you know Pete? Because I know you knew Dave Gilmore now. Did you ever get a chance to come close to meeting him, or did you know have any mutual friends?
Well, I'm, I had some people who knew him. I knew them. I mean, but no, I've never met any of the Beatles. I passed Paul's house very often because I lived nearby, and I passed Abbey Road, and I crossed this crossing countless of times, and driven through it too. But I didn't pay attention to it. It was just my route to home. I didn't think about it, and that was this recent craze about going there, photographing oneself, and things. It's to do with internet. It's to do with Instagram and all that. Photographs. Everybody has to have photographs, and everyone can take photograph on their camera on their phones now. But before, it wasn't such a tiresome experience as it is now for drivers and things in Abbey Road. And I passed Paul's house not knowing it was his house, but now I know which one it is. So no, I didn't even try to hang about anywhere or anything like that.
You've been in so many places. You've been behind the Iron Curtain, and you've been in England, and you've been in America. Have you seen any other places that are Beatle highlights? Like you saw Paul's house. Did you see any other homes of the Beatles? Or
Yes, the
what
best thing,
else have you seen?
Liverpool. Liverpool is the best thing. Everyone should go there. It's a beautiful town. It's kind of, He had bad reputation for many years because the economy collapsed with the you know shipyards collapsing and all that. But it's doing well now through different type of economy and through tourism. And Beatles really contribute very much because people go there still for this Beatlemania thing. And they've got several museums there, uh, the directed towards this theme, and homes. You can go to Mendips, where John Lennon lived with Aunt Mimi, inside, and it's National Trust which owns it. That's the organization which also owns Paul's house, and I believe they might buy eventually Ringo's and George's. I don't know, but if they do, one would be able to go, because what they did in Mendips and also in Paul's house is his childhood home. They recreated the kind of furniture and all that from the 50s, and kitchen like that, very different to what we used to now in bathrooms and all that. So it is very charming and great thing to do. And it's, well, I always cried. I've been many times to Liverpool, and I always cried in John Lennon's bedroom because it's such a moving thing, and it looks just like apparently when he lived there.
Well, those are good places to see. Maybe some of the people now, when they travel, will take your advice and go to see some of them. I know you said the Beatles led you to like the rest of rock and roll. You know, you liked more rock and roll through their records.
Yes.
And which groups, maybe from the British invasion, besides the Beatles, do you like? Or any particular songs? Do you go to see any of these groups? You know, the groups that came over with the Beatles from England in the British
I've seen
invasion.
the Rolling Stones. I've seen them in Warsaw because they actually came in those bygone days, and that was a great concert. I've seen the Animals, and I always loved Eric Burton. His voice is just unbelievable. Great British band, which did eventually make it in America too. Um, I didn't go to see Cliff Richard and the Shadows. They came here too, and the Hollies, because I wasn't into their music. I loved Led Zeppelin and Pink Floyd and people like that. Kind of, I've in my teens I liked really heavy kind of rock, So I went for things like Led Zeppelin and things.
So you liked heavy metal?
Not heavy metal, heavy rock. Heavy metal, well, it's a bit too much. I don't like the death metal or anything, too head banging. Just like melody with rock. So I love Guns N' Roses because they have beautiful melodies and very talented songwriters there. But I wouldn't go for, let's say, I don't know, can't think of the names even now, but anything typical heavy metal now. Like Metallica has some nice songs, but wouldn't probably bother to go to the concert.
Me too. I'm not a big fan of the stuff that's too heavy, but the bands
Yeah.
you mentioned, I think, have some really good songs.
Yes.
Um, we had talked already, and we said, Paul and John covered so many songs from the 1950s, and I said, the ones that I like the best. But John had a real interesting love of Elvis Presley. I was
Yes.
wondering, he was very influenced by Elvis, and he said when he started, and they joked, we're like four Elvises, and at JFK in the interview, Ringo shook like Elvis, and they went to see Elvis in Hollywood. Do you like Elvis Presley, and what do you think of Elvis, and what do you think of the Beatles, when they went over to see him and the songs they've recorded? What are just some general thoughts about Elvis and the Beatles?
I love the versions, Beatle versions of it, especially Paul. Paul, in early days, already in the Cavern and then in Hamburg, did fantastic Elvis. But I wasn't into Elvis myself until he died, I'm afraid. That's well, my parents, well, my mother in particular, she quite liked Elvis, but it was sort of parents' music for me. But after that, I had few older friends, and they kind of played Elvis, and they introduced me to more and more. And of course, yes, influence of Beatles through that. So yes, now I like to watch, for example, Elvis there, all in black leather at this comeback concert. That's a great one. Don't like him fat in Las Vegas, but
Hmm.
I suppose it's, not because he was fat, but it's just
It's
not.
sad.
Yes, yes, yes. But young days, in a young Elvis was fantastic, of course.
And like I'm sure Elvis is a hit all over the world, but he never traveled and toured. So
Never.
I was just wondering in Poland what they make of Elvis. What is their
Well, people like
perception of him?
it, that the older people really were fans at the time. But like my mother was and so on. But uh, now I think he's just very well known. But someone of the past, I suppose. I
Yeah,
don't think it's much to youngsters now or something.
it would have been interesting to see what would have happened if he could have toured over there. Like he never went any place, but I guess we'll never know because he never went.
Really, yes, because it would have been, but he had this manager who obviously couldn't travel because he was illegally in US, so he didn't want Elvis to travel. Unfortunately,
Colonel
yeah,
Parker. Yeah.
yeah, that's it.
Well, my friend Warren Brown has been waiting with some other good questions and follow up, so I give you Warren Brown.
Okay, Anna, this is a fantasy type question for you.
Mhm.
Uh, you, you mentioned that you've seen Paul McCartney in concert several times. Here in the U.S., he has a part of his shows where he brings fans on stage.
Yes,
Uh,
yes.
uh, if he were to pick you, what would your reaction be, and what would you do when on stage with him?
Bloody, I really don't know. I,
Me either.
no, I'm quite starstruck. I'm an actress and I've met enormous stars from film and television, I think. But
Name some.
you
Who
get
did you meet?
starstruck.
Drop some names.
Yes. I don't know. I don't know. I hope I would be reasonable, but I doubt it.
I,
Yes.
I, I would be starstruck too, and I'd probably be in shock, and I probably couldn't even walk up there.
I worry that that might happen to me. Yeah.
All right. Can you please tell us, fans of yours, where we can come listen to you again and your shows? And do you have a website?
I don't have a website, but I have a Anna Frawley's Beatles show on a Radio Net page on Facebook. And this page has got enormous amount of people following it or whatever it's called. And you can go there, which is my equivalent to website. I found that people are reluctant to go on websites these days. They prefer to just go on Facebook or Instagram. I don't actually, I have Instagram, but I don't use it, so I'm not there that much. But yes, so Facebook is still my medium, but I might move on to something more trendy if it has to be. The website is probably not the answer.
Right. Can I ask you which guest you have coming on your show, and or would you like to surprise everybody?
I'm not very big journalistic sort of person, and I prefer just to play music. I adore choosing the songs which I'm playing and to unusual songs or unusual interpretations and things, as well as the ones one can get on released records. And this is really my passion. I'm a sort of DJ person rather than journalist. But if people ask me to interview them, and I get enormous amount of people asking, recently been telling people I'm not going to because it's kind of takes a lot of time from my show, and many people just want to push their book, or which is I'm not interested in many of these things. But some, of course, who are very nice people, like I interviewed, for example, Chris O'Dell, who knew Beatles and wrote very entertaining book. That was fun. And her good friend Leslie Cavendish, who was a hairdresser of the Beatles. I would gladly interview Leslie again. He's full of great humor and fantastic stories, and he wrote great book about them. So if I find something interesting, somebody who has something to, yes, if Paul McCartney asked me, I would be like a shot. It'd be easier, not face. Yes. Oh, really? Yes.
Warren, can I sneak a question in?
And you sure can, Bulldog.
Anna, girl, before you go now, we want you to know now that we still love you so. But before you go, tell us some of those celebrities who you know. I love the gossip. I was wondering which big stars you've met because I love Hollywood and stuff.
Well, I've worked with so many fantastic people. I don't know if you, because most of them were British, I suppose. They're like Rupert Everett or Michael
Yes,
Caine.
yes,
Yes, and Michael Caine was big in America, I think, for a while. Uh,
yes.
yes, so I worked with him, lovely guy, really sweet. And Americans, I worked with Kathy Bates, very nice lady,
Very
who
big star.
a big star and very warm person. And she celebrated St. Patrick's Day. I bought for her special Guinness special edition whole six pack, and she was very grateful for that.
Okay, that's pretty
And
cool.
yes, and she knows a lovely lady, and well, many more. Julie Andrews, uh,
Wow.
who was the sweetest woman again. You know, I was her stand-in in one of the films. You know, standing. I had to be before she appeared. I was in the situations and things. And it was she came.
Which film?
That was a film, Unconditional Love. Uh,
Oh, okay.
but yes, Paul Hogan, Australian.
Actor, sure, sure. Crocodile Dundee.
No, Paul Hogan was a director.
Oh,
He,
I'm sorry. That shows my ignorance. I'll
that
just let you talk.
Paul Hogan
Okay.
did My Best Friend's Wedding, things like that, with Julia Roberts and things. And Unconditional Love, I was Julie Andrews. She kissed me every morning, three times on both cheeks. Wonderful lady. And so, again, such a fantastic woman. Nice to know that a lot of these people are really sweet and not some, you know. Then Lynn Redgrave became a close friend, sadly not with us any longer. She was in America for a long time, sister, of course, from big Redgrave family, but she lived in America. And many other people. I can't offhand just think now, but if you know I had more time, I might.
Well, that's really fascinating. So you're very talented in many areas. You're a talented actress and a talented radio host. And just I'm interested in your acting. As you became interested in drama and acting, what were your favorite movies and or plays? Like what inspired you to love theater and movies?
I loved lots of French films when I was growing up, also Polish films, which you wouldn't be familiar with. But as for the American ones, my mother's favorite was always things like Casablanca, which I also loved, and many more afterwards. Of course, the titles are not good, but I loved Humphrey Bogart because that was on television mostly that I saw, because of course it was old films. But um, he reminded me so much of my grandfather. He was just like my grandfather. Not that my grandfather was either detective or a bad guy or or a gangster, but he
Sure.
looked just like Humphrey, and had his style, except for he didn't smoke. My grandfather, they looked the same in these hats and suits like that and things, and was quite short. But yes, all this kind of films I loved. Also Marilyn Monroe, of course, and Doris Day, all this from American in early days, and all the other films. I don't know. There's such a long list. And Love them all.
Did many of the American films come like did they come over to Poland like much later and you caught them, or are were they released when you
they,
started?
they used to release films. We were lucky in Poland because it was a country which had much more freedom than other countries from behind the Iron Curtain when it comes to culture and music and films. And we saw a lot of films, practically all, unless it was some kind of, against, like James Bond, that was not shown because it was always some Russian spies and things like that in it. So
Sure.
they didn't show. But everything else, yes. But it was usually several months or even a year later. But we saw most of the big ones, yes.
Well, Paul had the song from Live and Let Die. He did a good job with that James Bond movie
I
with
seen this film
Roger
in
Moore.
London, yes, yes.
So, so when did you become aware of James Bond? Did you know he existed, the films, or did
Of
they?
course we knew it existed. I'm not into that kind of spy movies and things anyway, but one of my boyfriends in the early days in England, he loved them. So we went to the cinema for the marathon session, James Bond films, and it was about, I don't know, mostly they were Sean Connery once, and then there was Roger Moore and things. But after that, when it was the new and so on, I don't, but they're always on TV now, but I'm not really into that kind of cinema. I prefer something more, deep than just
Sure.
action, yes.
I'm just wondering today, like when you go to the movies, have any recent movies struck you you really like, or any recent theater
Yes,
productions?
I like
What kinds of things
yesterday.
do you like today?
Yesterday, that was a nice film made in England. Did you see that? It's a Beatle related.
I haven't seen it yet, but I think I'm gonna watch the DVD this week. Do you recommend it? You really like it? You like the music?
Yes, everyone in the audience, which was full up, which is hardly ever these days in cinema, was practically crying, at certain places. And yes, very good film. Also, Bohemian Rhapsody with the theme of Freddie Mercury. That was a good one.
Yes.
Well, quite a lot of film. I'm not good with remembering titles, I'm afraid, but yes, I still watch it. I still go to cinema regularly, and mostly I see continental films here from Europe, but also when it's good American film, I see it too.
So you keep up. So how often? So you go to many movies. How often do you go to see plays or drama?
Well, that is my love. I always loved the theater, and I did work in a theater a lot. And I go to the theatre at least once a week. So if I can, sometimes I can't, but if I can, it's once a week. And the Warsaw's got splendid theatres, like London as well. So if I'm in London, I go there. I go here all the time. So yes, I go all the time. I go to Shakespeare as well as contemporary plays and love it all.
So you're extremely talented. I mean, you've been in on the
It
stage
was
and with
extremely.
the movie stars and with your radio show. So that's very you're very humble because you don't bring up your accomplishments unless we ask you. So I admire that you're a very kind person. Anytime you've always supported my articles from the
Well,
beginning when I
very
struggled to get
practical,
noticed.
so
You were
easy.
very kind, and I appreciate that. But you saw the Queen movie too. Do you like Queen? And what did you think of the Freddie Mercury biography, Bohemian Rhapsody? I know you said you saw it.
I wasn't a huge fan of Queen, really, but yes, some things I like, but I really loved the show at the Live 8 concert, which I saw with my friends. It was all over London. We had parties for Live 8, and it was in a house where we watched a huge party, enormous amount of people together. This whole Live 8 event. It was like that in every other house all over London, and then the Queen really were amazing at this concert. and I think they stole the whole thing from everybody, from every other entertainer who appeared on Live Aid. And Freddie Mercury was tremendous. So then I kind of started paying attention to him. Sadly, he was dead quite soon after. But the film depicted this beautifully, and the moment where Live Aid starts, it made me cry as well.
Did you like Paul at Live Aid when he came out and sang "Let It Be"?
Well, Paul was very unlucky because not only he was quite late in the day, but also he had trouble with sound. The sound system failed when he was on. But of course, I would always say I like Paul. I can't say I ever not liked him. You know.
Sure, I liked him there too, but I also thought Queen stole the show. I thought that they gave a fabulous performance. But
Yes.
so on your next show, your next radio show, what's going to be the theme of that one?
I don't know yet. Don't know. Sometimes I don't know. I have to give my engineers and my team in radio quite early playlist 4 days before, so I will know by tomorrow. It's gonna be. I don't always have exact theme, you know. Sometimes it's just a hodgepodge of songs, but usually come up with something interesting. And my listeners are very, very good, and they forgive me for everything, and they really loyal. I love that. I have the same listeners, so many, for 8 years now, which is something, I think.
Well, it's a great show. You know, after Warren talks to you, we have a little tradition. We always sing the end, and in the end, the love you take is equal to the love you make. And we don't do it because we're great singers. We do it because we just want to send out like a nice little Beatle vibe. So after Warren talks to you, will you sing that with us?
I'm not a great singer, but we'll join you. Okay.
Oh, I'm sure you'll do fine. Maybe I'll sing the first line, you could do the second, and Warren could close it out.
Well, maybe
Because we like to send the show off with that. But I give you back to Warren. Thank you so much for being on.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me.
Anna, if it pleases you, I am the worst singer in the world, and I get to do this every show, so I feel your pain.
Oh, you'll be fine. You're very good. It's very charming. And you guys will be wonderful. There's no worries. And in the end,
the love you take is equal to the
love you made.
Excellent.